Hello, everyone. I want to say congratulations for sticking with this, and if you're able to put in the time and doing the reading alongside, that's helping you remember all of this and put it together. And soon we'll have a good grasp of the big picture of the book of Genesis. Now, of course, in chapters 1 to 11, we have the four events: creation, fall, flood, and the division of the nations. And then when we get from really Genesis 12 through 50, we read of four generations from Genesis 12 through 30. We follow the life of Abram, who becomes Abraham. And Genesis 24 through 27, we read of the life of Isaac, and we get to hear a little bit about Ishmael and his descendants. In Genesis 28 through 35, we read about Jacob. Chapter 36, we read about Esau and his descendants. Sort of the story focuses there. And then Genesis 37 through 50, we read about Joseph. The story focuses on Joseph, and for the most part, and in each of these generations, I guess we could say that the death of is really mentioned in the next generation. And of course, last week when we left off talking about Joseph, and of course we've covered already where he's been a slave with Potiphar, and then he went to prison because of false allegations. He's in prison for a long time. During that time, of course, God gave him the interpretations for a couple of dreams, and then he has to wait another full 2 years before Pharaoh has a dream, and the chief cupbearer remembers, oh yeah, I know a guy who can help with that. And so then Joseph is brought in, and God gives him the interpretation as well as some really good advice, you might say, some good instructions on how to proceed given what is coming. And which of course was the 7 years of abundance, followed by 7 years of severe famine. And what we find out, just as we were closing, right, that it's not just Egypt that's experiencing this, but really that whole Eastern Mediterranean area around the seaboard and so on, that whole area, it seems, is undergoing a severe famine. And it's just not the Egyptians that are going to be hungry. It'll be much more, there'll be other countries, other peoples, groups that will be hungry. And they will be experiencing these hardships. And so what we have is then people will start to come to Egypt to buy some food. And so what we have we will pick up in Genesis chapter 42 today in verses 1 and 2, where we start out, when Jacob learned that there was grain in Egypt, he said to his sons, why do you just keep looking at each other? He continued, I have heard that there is grain in Egypt, so go down there and buy some for us, so that we may live and not die. Now that might sound like hyperbole, exaggeration. And certainly maybe if there was only going to be a 1 year or 2 year, they'd been able to, 1 year maybe they had enough supplies, you can start eating your livestock, but we know from our perspective it's going to last a lot longer, and eventually they will know that too. But what we see is this, he's looking ahead and knowing that if things don't change, could be the end of them. But of course, once again, God has went before them, and we will see that he will keep his promise to provide and to bless Jacob, even as he has had for Isaac and Abraham. And so what Jacob does know for sure is that this sounds like a really wonderful opportunity to not enter into starvation. And so he sends his 10 sons, to buy grain from Egypt. And he keeps Benjamin back, right? He doesn't want anything to happen to Benjamin. He doesn't want any harm coming to him. So the 10 sons go to Egypt. And as it's my understanding anyway, that there's all 10 of them go. And they go to Egypt, and Joseph was the head of selling the grain, and he recognized them, but they did not recognize him in his Egyptian garb, in his Egyptian clothing. And now, about 2 decades later, certainly, well, he looks different, right? He's not only speaking Egyptian and using interpreter, he's that much older. And of course, also, he's no longer ready. So he's not looking like that young teenager. He's at all. And of course, they're not expecting him either. And when they met him, what's interesting is those dreams he had that had foretold them bowing down. Well, that's exactly what we read happens. That when they met him, they bowed down with their face to the ground. And Joseph accuses them of being spies and uses that as a way to interrogate them and to find out how his brother's doing, how his father's doing. And then he puts them in custody for 3 days. And on the 3rd day, he releases them, but he holds one brother, that is Simeon, back until they return with their younger brother to prove that they're not spies. Right? Joseph wants to know where they're at. He also wants to see his brother. And so this is, you might say, his opportunity without revealing who he is. Now, the brothers see this treatment, right? They see this treatment as punishment from God because of what they have done to Joseph, right? The memory of their actions lived on in their minds, right? There was still shame and a sense of guilt, this nagging that never went away. They saw this as payback time for the distress that they had caused Joseph. And well, really they didn't know if he was even alive. And so while they talked in their native tongue to each other, what they don't realize is Joseph is understanding every word they're saying. Well, he sends them on their way, and he has their money put back into their sacks of grain without their knowledge. And when they find out later, it scares them, prompting them, what is this that God has done to us, right? It's like, what's going on? Is God messing with us? What is going on? And when they arrive back home in Canaan, they tell their father all of what's happened. And Jacob's response in verse 36 is he's like, everything is against me. Everything is against me. You ever feel like that? Ever have one of those days where it seems like everything's going wrong? Are you one of those people who tend to sort of put things into black or white or just sort of see the negatives and not the positives? Well, in this case, as he's putting all this together, Jacob feels defeated, deflated. Everything's against me. And Jacob doesn't want to send Benjamin not back to that situation. But the brothers know, we're not going back there. We're not going back there with how things already went once without Benjamin. And so eventually, right, food runs out. So they got to go. And so he does send Benjamin, but he also says, just as like the same technique that he used with Esau, he says, let's bring, the best of what we have left. And let's give them as a gift. Trying to curry favor, you might say, trying to say, hey, let's operate on good terms. And so they bring gifts, and so they come and they're with their gifts and with Benjamin, while their one brother is still held over in jail for that swap. And what we have is that when they arrive, they're invited for a meal. And they're wondering what's going on. When they come, they tell the steward, hey, her money came back with us. And he said, oh, don't worry about it. God just blessed you, basically. He says that. And then And then when they're having him into the house, he's like, they're scared once more, right? And their minds are going, he wants to attack us and overpower us and seize us as slaves and take over our donkeys. Have you ever found yourself in a similar spot, maybe frightened, unsure, anxious, telling yourself a worst case scenario? Well, when Joseph comes in, they once again bow to him and they offer them the gifts that he had brought them. And when he saw his brother, he choked up. Right? Decades. His brother was just a young fellow when he last seen him. And he goes to his private quarters where he weeps. And then when he gets control of his motions, it says he washes his face to wash off probably the stains on his face from the tears. And we also know that washing your face, especially with cold water, will help calm you down. And then he comes in and they sit where they sit. He sits where he sits. The Egyptians sit in another place, his household that would be eating. And it says that each of them were seated in their birth order, right? That they were all seated in their birth order. It's like, once again, right? This guy, whoever this Egyptian is, knows more than he should, you might say. And Benjamin gets treated even better with more food. Well, the next day they leave, but Joseph was going to test them once again. Where are their hearts at? And so this time he sets up Benjamin, and so that he has to stay and be imprisoned. And Judah offers to stay as Joseph's slave in place of Benjamin, right? You can tell things have changed. No longer selling their brother as a slave. Now he's saying, I'll be the slave. Let my brother go. And we're told he doesn't want to see how this would impact their father. No way do they want this to happen to their dad. Well, it's at this point we get into chapter 45, and Joseph then reveals his true identity, right? He sees there's this heart change, and he reveals his true identity as their brother, and he asks them about their father, but it's so that no one can say a thing, at least to his older brothers. They are terrified. Uh-oh. They remember very well what they did. Uh-oh. But what we read in verses 4 to 8, that Joseph proceeds to give his perspective on the why of his life, that Joseph is in putting these pieces together, right? And he is not angry, or at least no longer angry and bitter or resentful. He says, actually in verses 4 to 9 of chapter 45, he says, Then Joseph said to his brothers, Come close to me. When they had done so, he said, I am your brother Joseph, the one you sold into Egypt. And now do not be distressed and do not be angry with yourselves for selling me here, because it was to save lives that God sent me ahead of you. For 2 years now there has been famine in the land, and for the next 5 years there will be no plowing and reaping. But God sent me ahead of you to preserve for you a remnant on earth and to save your lives by a great deliverance. So then, it was not you who sent me here, but God. He made me father to Pharaoh, lord of his entire household, and ruler of all Egypt. Now hurry back to my father and say to him, This is what your son Joseph says. God has made me lord of all Egypt. Come down to me. Don't delay. Wow. What we see, right, is God taking something that was wrong, that was horrible, traumatic, gut-wrenchingly difficult, extremely stressful for Joseph. Something that plagued the brothers' conscience, right? The last 20 plus years. And they turn it into, and God turns it into something amazing. And that's the God we serve. Joseph didn't get sidetracked, even though things were difficult. He kept his integrity. He did what was right. He didn't use it to justify anger or poor life choices. He did what was right before God, even when he got punished for it. Or it seemed that way, right? He got punished for doing the right thing there with Potiphar's wife. And he didn't ruminate on the evil done to him, planning revenge and nursing his anger and letting it become bitterness and resentment and sort of nursing the hatred. Was it hard? Absolutely. Was it distressing? Yes. Was it probably even traumatic? Yes. But we always need to remember, right, there's more to the story. For God brings healing, and God has good planned even for the bad that's done for us. Right? It's truly an amazing God we serve. And I hope as you read this story, as you think of this story, you are able to enter into the emotions of the story as you hear it, as you read it, that it may awaken maybe other past hurts or emotions, pains, losses that God would love to heal for you. I hope you're encouraged by the events that portray God's goodness and God's care and God's provision and God's protection. Right? It can be hard to go through those things. Sometimes we have some of our losses and stuff buried, but if they should come forth, bring them to the Lord in prayer. Ask Him to bring healing and reflect on how God may be using even this, our time here, in His intent to bring good out of bad. Well, the story goes on to tell us that Joseph invites them all to move, to come live in Egypt with him. And after weeping and kissing and hugging them, he sends them on their way, right? He informs them, listen, guys, there's 5 more years of famine left. And as well, Pharaoh and his officials hear of this reunion, and they're pleased. And Pharaoh says, hey, tell them to come, and I'll give them the best of the land in Egypt. And he sets them up with the U-Haul of the day. He sends them up with these carts to go and get their families. And he says, don't bother bringing all your stuff back. I'll give you the best we have in Egypt. And so Joseph follows through, and he adds provisions and clothing and money and donkeys to carry everything. And he sends them off with this warning. He says, don't quarrel on the way. Don't get distracted. Don't fight. We're all going to be together. It's all going to be good. This is a great thing. And then it calls me to reflect. Are you a person who focuses on slights, offenses, misunderstandings, on what you don't have, on the past? Or do you focus on the good that you have, the present, the possibilities of the future? So what happens? Well, we read in verses 25 through 28, ending the chapter. So they went up out of Egypt and came to their father Jacob in the land of Canaan. They told him, Joseph is still alive. In fact, he is the ruler of all Egypt. Jacob was stunned. He did not believe them. But when he told them everything Joseph had said to them, and when he saw the carts Joseph had sent to carry him back, the spirit of their father Jacob revived. And Israel said, I'm convinced My son Joseph is still alive. I will go and see him before I die. So what happens? Well, we get to end on this wonderful note, right? That the son that Jacob thought he had lost, that he had died, is alive, right? He'd gone through that heartbreak. Now to find out his son is alive, and not only is he alive, he's the ruler of all Egypt. Wow. We're going to end there. It's a beautiful place to end, as we can maybe just enter in. If you're a father, maybe you can appreciate that, or you've lost a loved one, you can maybe appreciate that, maybe even more deeply. But I want to ask you, as you're reading, as you're listening, as we're learning together, I hope that you're taking some time afterwards just to reflect on what you're learning and experiencing and integrate it into your life. That is, does your understanding of God, as you look at how you respond to God, do you keep God at arm's length because you don't trust him? That maybe you see him as harsh? Or does your actions reveal that you understand God as this God that we're learning about? A God who does amazing things, who can protect, who provides, even in situations where it seems just the opposite, that he's doing neither or just the opposite. And that his timeline can't be rushed. Right? That if we do, we only mess things up, make it more difficult for ourselves and for others. And so I want to leave us in this wonderful place of where things are really radically different now for Jacob and his brothers. But it's again, though, we see that the same God coming through once again. I hope you take some time to reflect on that. And if you need to integrate that reality of who God is into your understanding of God. And next week, hopefully, we're going to finish up with Genesis. Thanks for joining me today.